What companies deserve your hard-earned dollar? Which would you want to work for? How can you know if they share your values? Just ask us. Just Capital is a nonprofit that tracks who really means business in supporting workers, customers, communities, the environment, and shareholders. We measure progress, track success, and help them be better. When you see the Just Capital seal, you know what's real, because just business is better business. Visit justcapital.com to learn who makes your dollar count.
Good afternoon. We are doing it live right here in the 4 o'clock hour, doing more in 2024, just like the cryptos and the stock market so far this year. It's Mottek On Money, live on the air here in 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Cryptomania returning to the financial markets as Bitcoin blows past 50,000, then past 60,000 for the first time in a couple of years. Bitcoin hitting record highs in some currencies already and is near its all-time high in dollars. Gold, meanwhile, has also hit a record high today. Bitcoin has rallied after the approval of Bitcoin ETFs recently and the anticipation of the so-called Bitcoin halving coming up soon, as the NASDAQ and S&P 500 closed out the week at record highs here. We see a lot of action in Bitcoins, and also the iShares Bitcoin Trust saw about 96 million shares change hands this week, more than double its previous record high, which came earlier this week. All kinds of crazy predictions now, wild predictions on where Bitcoin might go from here. According to one, Bitcoin is hurtling toward its record high of 69,000. Some experts see 200,000 in sight, maybe even more. Interesting that Bitcoin appears to be going mainstream with a lot of talk among some of the big brokerages now. Well, joining us live now, the former top bank regulator in the United States who has a complete command of understanding of crypto and its place in the financial system. I'm elated to say joining us live now is Brian P. Brooks, former acting U.S. Controller of the Currency under President Trump and prominent banking and fintech executive, prominent financial services practices attorney, partner at O'Melveny & Myers. During his time in office as the nation's top bank regulator, he helped guide the banking system through the uncertainties of the pandemic and the explosion of financial innovation that accelerated during that time. He also worked to modernize the banking system by, among other things, defining the scope of permissible cryptocurrency activities. Brian P. Brooks, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you with us again. It's been a while since we've chatted behind live microphones, coming off that so-called crypto winter or ice age, and now this big rally. Give us your reaction to what we've seen here this week.
Well, Frank, I don't want to make this about me, but I think I predicted this on your program. So, a couple of things have happened in the last couple of months, right? And two really important things in particular. One is, based on a court order, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, finally approved these Bitcoin ETFs. And the second thing is, we saw a lot of investor behavior. So we've learned something really important in the last few months, and that is that investors wanted Bitcoin and were being prevented from getting access to Bitcoin by the SEC's failure to act. Now that the SEC has opened the door, you see a gigantic increase in new investment dollars. And Frank, I just want to give you one number out there that your listeners should listen to, because this tells you what the value of regulatory clarity is. The Bitcoin market, the Bitcoin market is up $400 billion in the last 3 months. That's the value of regulatory clarity. There were $400 billion worth of people's investment dollars that were looking to get access and couldn't, and now they have access. That is an enormous, enormous change.
On the air live with Brian P. Brooks, formerly the top bank regulator in the United States, who speaks in clear, plain language when it comes to crypto. And I have to say, I have to hand it to you. I really appreciate that, sharing your expertise with our audience in plain English. And so from the Uber driver, Lyft drivers out there to the top bankers, once again, crypto has become a big topic of conversation. One major financial investment firm actually, according to one report I saw now, recommending that the traditional 60-40 portfolio model should evolve to include a 1% to 3% allocation to crypto. Give us your reaction on how things have evolved to this point.
Well, Frank, I'm on the board of one of the asset managers that is a Bitcoin ETF sponsor. And, in that company, we've done some analysis that shows that a portfolio that has between 50 basis points and 1% of Bitcoin in it and keeps everything else equal, okay, but just with a 50 basis point to 1% allocation, performs better over the long term by 1, 2, or 3 percentage points than the exact same portfolio except without the Bitcoin. There are other analogies to this in asset allocation, but the point is what any balanced portfolio should have is diversification, asset allocation, and counter-cyclical uncorrelated assets. And that's really what crypto is an asset class that isn't well correlated with any other asset class in your portfolio. So it provides growth when other assets don't, and it provides counter-cyclicality when other assets are moving into a cycle. That's what a lot of studies show, and I don't give personal and financial advice, but I think the economic evidence makes that pretty clear.
On the Air Live with Brian P. Brooks, and certainly we've seen a lot of speculation here now as to where Bitcoin, for example, goes from here. Some pretty big numbers. As far as Bitcoin analysis is concerned, can you assure the folks that that it is being analyzed somehow other than it goes up because it goes up and goes down because it goes down?
Yeah, well look, Frank, Bitcoin is a valuable asset for one simple reason. It's really the same reason that gold is a valuable asset, which is that it's scarce and it can't be debased. So comparing that to fiat currency, comparing to dollars and euros and yen, those assets can exist in any supply the government wants to supply it in. And the price of everything is a function of supply and demand. So an asset that can't be increased in supply over time is likely to become more valuable. What's going on today, and the way I think listeners should think about the value of Bitcoin is you have happening at the same time a giant demand increase. That's what the Bitcoin ETF approval is all about, is suddenly we've made this available to retirement savers, mutual fund investors, and institutions that previously had no ability to access Bitcoin. So the demand is likely between 10 and 50x what it was before the approval. And the supply of Bitcoin is about to be cut in half, right? So the rate of new Bitcoin being produced goes down by half roughly every 4 years. That's the halving you referenced to in the lead-in here. And those two things happening at the same time, a 50x increase in demand and a halving of supply, you don't need to know much more about any asset than those two factors to know what that will do to price pressures, right? Price will go up in that environment.
Please explain halving for us, how this works under the Bitcoin scheme here and the way it was envisioned by the still mysterious founder, right? That we still don't know who actually created all this.
Well, look, I'll come back to the mystery of the inventor. There's been some interesting developments on that in recent days. But in terms of the halving, the original idea of Bitcoin, Frank, was that, and remember, Bitcoin was invented in the middle of the financial crisis. That's where it came from, was a belief that there's something wrong with the status quo financial system. So the concept of Bitcoin was, what if you had a currency that couldn't be controlled or debased by any central authority? And the thinking was, well, the way we'll achieve that is we will limit the total supply of Bitcoin that will ever exist, and we'll limit it in computer code that can never be changed. So no matter how many people want it, no matter how many politicians demand it, the number of Bitcoin will never increase. It's like an electronic gold standard, if you will. And the way that's achieved is Bitcoin gets released into the system through a process called Bitcoin mining, kind of like gold mining. But the amount of Bitcoin available to be mined goes down based on an algorithm, again, that can't be changed. So every 4 years, the rate of new supply goes down, kind of like once you've mined a lot of the gold on Earth, there's less gold left to find, right? And so that concept, I call it algorithmic monetary policy, is designed to ensure no inflation in the Bitcoin system, even when there's a lot of inflation in the regular monetary system. That was its feature at design. And now that we've been through a period of very high inflation, you see how valuable that is. It's the idea of sound monetary policy through computer code that people are buying here.
Is it your impression that we are seeing the cryptos rally on the inflation, the high inflation that we've seen, or is it correlated somehow to the NASDAQ and the tech stocks, which have also rallied to record highs recently? What is your thinking on all that?
Well, the reason that there's an imperfect correlation of Bitcoin to equities, but the reason there's a correlation at all is that Bitcoin markets usually react to forecasted inflation. So if you think about what's going on, we've had a period of very high inflation. The Fed responded to the high inflation by raising interest rates to take inflation out of the system. And when they announced they were going to raise interest rates back in November of 2021, the price of Bitcoin fell because markets expected that there would be an anti-inflationary policy in fiat currency, which meant you didn't have to hedge against inflation as much. Now what the Fed is signaling is that there will be rate reductions coming sometime this year. The bond market is pricing in somewhere between 3 and 6 reductions in interest rates over the next 12 months. And so the Bitcoin market at the margins is seeing, we brought inflation back down, and as a result, the Fed is now going to loosen monetary policy, which will tend to bring inflation back up in the future. That drives people to both gold and Bitcoin. That's why gold and Bitcoin are both going up at the same time. So there's definitely some of that. But I emphasize that's at the margins. The real driver here is supply and demand. The supply is about to be cut in half, and the demand is about to increase 10 to 50x. Those things together, and forget inflation. Inflation is a marginal effect. These other things are massive effects.
Do you have your crystal ball out this afternoon? Do you want to take a shot at where Bitcoin goes from here?
Well, I mean, look, there are a lot of people who have, gotten a lot of bad reputations guessing when Bitcoin will hit 250,000 or guessing when it's going to hit 1 million. I don't know what date that will happen, but I do know what the factors are. And, the rate of growth in these Bitcoin ETFs is the fastest rate of growth of any ETF that has ever been created. Indeed, at this current rate of growth, the size of the Bitcoin ETF market will be the same size as the gold ETF market this year. And if you think about it, gold ETFs have been around for decades, so it's a fairly shocking rate of demand. The point is, we've artificially suppressed access to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for years and years through regulatory inaction. And now that we finally have regulatory clarity, there isn't an upper ceiling on it, Frank. So it could be 250,000, it could be 1 million. That could happen this year or in 3 years. But I have high confidence that there's no longer a ceiling on the asset class. And so think about other assets you're familiar with. Nobody ever thought the Dow would go to 36,000, but now it's surpassed 36,000 because there's no ceiling on it. That's, I think, the main point. It's not about a price number or a specific timetable. It's now about the artificial constraints have been taken off, and Bitcoin is now achieving takeoff velocity.
And it is to be noted, I saw the write-up about this as well, that the Bitcoin ETFs have surpassed the silver ETFs already some time ago. So interesting to
Correct.
note, right? That is big news as well. We see gold, by the way, just below 2,100 today at a record high, and Bitcoin is at a record high in many currencies. I know you're very popular at various business conferences, and again, for obvious reasons, since you've laid it out so beautifully here today, as far as the future for cryptocurrency and the use for cryptocurrencies, you noted previously that you feel that Bitcoin and other cryptos are not necessarily a threat to currencies, but to bank transfer, the bank transfer setup around the world, right? Give us your view of what you see ahead in the future for the use of cryptocurrency.
Well, first of all, the more that blockchain technology gets integrated inside of the financial system, the more it is likely that we will migrate to crypto tokens as the underlying means of transmitting all kinds of value. And so for me, a lot of it is forecasting what are the crypto layers that are likely to replace which layers of the financial system. And one thing I've said on this program before, Frank, is at some point, smart contract platforms are likely to overtake credit card networks, payment settlement networks like the automated clearinghouse and other things in doing what they're doing. Those use cases are still in the relatively early stages, but you're starting to see many compelling uses of these things. And one of the things I've talked and written about quite a lot is the idea of stable coins being built on top of smart contract platforms and allowing people to use stable coins rather than bank accounts to hold dollar value in other parts of the world, basically like the euro dollar market was, in a different generation. I think those things are really starting to get traction, and you see that, frankly, in the price of tokens like Ethereum. which is also near record highs at the same time as Bitcoin. And it's not because of like a bandwagoning thing. It's because Ethereum and a handful of other smart contract blockchains are delivering real value to the financial system that is a lot more apparent today than it was yesterday. In fact, one point I'll just leave you with on this point, Frank, is both MasterCard and Visa are now supporting stable coins as well as fiat currencies by integrating with Ethereum and some of these other core blockchain protocols. That would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. But when MasterCard and Visa adopted, when PayPal launches their own proprietary stablecoin, you know we've kind of jumped the shark and we're in a different era now than we were before.
And I remember your excellent op-ed on stable coins, which appeared in the Wall Street Journal, which I'm sure people can look up and revisit. As far as these other meme tokens, certainly Doge, for example, was at 6 cents for a long time. Now it's up around 14 cents. And the Shiba Inu, which had that big splash a couple of years ago. And I remember when Scott Minerd, the late, great Scott Minerd, kicked off the Milken Institute Global Conference and mentioned that someone out there bought $8,000 worth of Shiba Inu, and it became worth billions of dollars and probably was one of the greatest trades, if not the greatest trade in world history. What about these meme tokens, and what about what's happening with these meteoric rises we're seeing again?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, Frank, my philosophy in life is it's better to be lucky than good. And so for a lot of these guys who happened to buy that token and made that kind of money, you don't hear the stories of all the people who bought a different token and lost all their money. Right. So I always caution people to sort of know what you're buying. But one of the things I think that retail investors don't necessarily understand well enough is in financial markets, there's a lot of people who are simply speculating on volatility. So it actually isn't about whether this particular asset has intrinsic value or fundamental value. It's that this asset has a certain kind of volatility that program traders can exploit. And that's true in derivatives markets that people understand pretty well. Like, people who are making money on orange juice futures or wheat futures, they have no interest in buying wheat or orange juice, but they see a certain kind of volatility, and by trading on the volatility, they bring efficiency to those markets. I think that's a lot of what's going on with these meme tokens. It's not that people necessarily believe, and for the listeners out there, I'm not putting down any individual asset, but a lot of people who buy Dogecoin are not buying it because there's something fundamental about the Dogecoin technology that they love. They're seeing a certain kind of trading behavior, and they're making predictions about that and bringing efficiency to that market, even though they have no interest in owning the underlying Dogecoin, just like in a commodities market. And those things over time, either come or they go. There are certain commodities that are not particularly volatile, that don't have a lot of movement, like aluminum, and there are other kinds that have a lot, like oil or certain kinds of agricultural commodities. So if you stop thinking about it as what is Dogecoin about, and you start thinking more about it as what is the price performance, the volatility effect, the beta of those kinds of assets, then you understand traders see this the same as any other volatile asset.
One of the best headlines I've seen this week was every dog coin has its day, and certainly they've had some pretty big days this past week. Anything else you'd like to mention about this epic crypto rally here and where things might go from here, even this weekend and into next week?
Well, look, I come back to supply and demand. I really do. There has been a fundamental market shift. This at this point, this is not a trend. This is the market now finding its sea legs now that there's not an artificial constraint. I would tell people they ought to be on the lookout for Ethereum ETFs next. And once that happens, this is going to look a lot more like a regular old mutual fund market where savers, retirement investors, institutional managers can own this stuff. That's a big development, and this is a time when many people will get in for the first time and will experience these markets. It's very exciting.
Indeed it is. Thank you very much for doing a beautiful explanation and sharing your expertise with us. Nobody does it better. Brian P. Brooks, the former top bank regulator in the United States, complete command of understanding of cryptos and its place in the financial system, former acting U.S. controller of the U.S. currency, prominent banking and fintech executive, prominent financial services practices attorney, partner at O'Melveny & Myers. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon, and hope to speak with you again very soon.
Always a pleasure, Frank. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Out to the freeways now, 790 KABC. Folks, let's be honest. Sometimes we find ourselves or a loved one dealing with a massive injury caused by a terrible accident by no fault of our own. Sometimes it's simply being the wrong place at the wrong time. We're good at preparing for earthquakes and fires, but let's not forget to prepare in case we're involved in a major accident. It's critical to know who to call first. Clark Fielding became an attorney to help you in a crisis. Fielding Law is focused on justice and resources for you because they understand how the system works and what to do in the most horrific situations. I always say to put the Fielding Law team in your phone under the word accident, so all you have to do is press dial. Believe me, you'll feel better having set this up for yourself and your family now. That number is 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. With the population exploding and increased vehicles on the freeways, be proactive, prepare for the worst, and expect the best. But if and when you do need help, call Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK, or you can go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Again, that's clarkthesharklaw.com. 790 KBC welcomes Dr. Jordan Peterson coming to the YouTube Theater on May 15th. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. And right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-790-5222. Yep, you heard me. If you're caller 9, you can get a pair of tickets to the show. Call now. Caller 9 wins 1-888-790-5222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. First day of March, coming off a winning month of February. We'll dive into the stock market action coming up here shortly. The Dow today moved up 91 points at 39,087. The S&P 500 has closed out the week at a record high of 41 points at 5,137. And the NASDAQ also popping today with the tech names continuing on a roll. NASDAQ up 183 at 16,275. The yield in the 10-year note has slipped to 4.18%. The price of gold closing at a record high today of nearly $37 at $2,091.60 an ounce. And as you just heard, it was a big week for cryptos. Bitcoin down about 300 now at 62,742 after making a run for its all-time high this week. Ethereum up 17 at 3,497. And we see Doge at the moment at 14 cents. And now the latest news for you here on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. We're doing it live in the 4 o'clock hour here on 790 KBC, live on the air, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Big month of February in the financial markets, and we got off to a pretty good start here in the month of March. Can you believe it? March 2024. We were doing more in 24, as is the stock market and cryptos and even gold, too, which has rallied to a record high. Cryptomania returned to the financial markets this week as Bitcoin blew past 50K, then past 60K for the first time in a couple of years. Bitcoin hitting record highs in some currencies already and is near its all-time high in dollars this week. Gold hitting a record high. The stock market finishing out the week higher with the Dow up 91 points today, the S&P 500 at 41, and that was good enough for a record high close at 5,137. And the NASDAQ, which hit its first record high in 2 years this week, extended its rally, moving up nearly 200 to close at 16,275, a record high close. Joining us live now is Jeff Garden, Chief Investment Officer at Lido Advisors, based in Century City, right here in Los Angeles. Jeff, thank you very much for taking the call here to wrap up what's been an epic week pretty much across the board. Great to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, Jeff. Give us your view of things here at the moment and what's propelled the market to record highs this week.
Well, look, I think you've got two competing forces, all looking at, or both looking at the same end result, which is lower interest rates. But, you know, you've got the stock market on one hand who believes that interest rates will be lower for one reason, and the bond market, which I think is predicting lower interest rates for an entirely different reason. So if we think about the stock market, I think a lot of what is kind of propelling us forward is really that hope and that anticipation that rates will be lower, cost of capital will be lower, and that should propel growth, economic activity, and justify higher valuations. And that's great, and that's fine, except if you kind of take a look at the bond market, what the bond market is telling you is that, yeah, interest rates are going to be lower, but they're going to be lower because things aren't as great as the stock market thinks, and we've got some trouble coming. So, you know, that's kind of what I think we're experiencing right now, and that's kind of what's driving stocks higher on one hand, but also I think developing and promoting some uncertainty with investors at the same time.
On the air live with Jeff Garden, Chief Investment Officer at Lido Advisors, based here in Los Angeles. And Jeff, on this program, we talk to the biggest fans of crypto as well as the harshest critics. Hard to ignore the big run-up in Bitcoin and the other cryptos this week. Where do you weigh in on cryptos at this point?
Well, look, I think that crypto's still, we'll call it an adolescent asset class, still maturing, still kind of coming into its own. We had a very, very big shakeout of all sorts of bizarre and strange anomalies in that world a couple of years ago. And, the strong has survived and come back in a roaring way, frankly, over the past few months. And look, I think the way you really have to look at this market right now and this asset class is it's just another risk environment. It's just another risk asset. You shouldn't ignore it. You shouldn't knock it down to some sort of scheme or a gimmick or something like that. You got to take it seriously. It's gotten to that point, but it's definitely not a currency. It is a risk asset. It is something that you put risk capital into, not something that you invest in to kind of protect yourself or store your value.
At this point, Jeff, with the market at or near all-time highs here to close out the week, any specific places where you would be putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, we're still waiting for that catalyst. Market timing is always a big kind of issue. It's something that we try to avoid almost at all costs, and make sure that your portfolio's constructed properly. Use protection. Take advantage of the options market. Take advantage of the various tools that are available to you in order to make sure that you eliminate that guessing game and create uncertainty where there's usually, create certainty where there's usually uncertainty. That's why we really like defined outcome trades. We really like trades that allow us to establish in advance what our outcomes are going to look like. And we do a lot of that using options today.
Terrific, Jeff. Well, great to connect with you here. Appreciate your taking the call here to wrap up a big week. That is Jeff Garden, Chief Investment Officer at Lido Advisors, based in Century City. Jeff, we wish you a great weekend, and thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and hope everybody has a great weekend also.
Thanks very much, Jeff. And recapping the month of February, we did see, by the way, Bitcoin up nearly 46% just for the month of, actually year to date for the month of February. Oil moved up by 10%. The price of gold was pretty much at the flat line until today, which hit a record high, up nearly $37 at $2,091.60, a record high close for gold. We did see the Dow gain about 3.5% since the start of the year. The S&P 500 is up just about 7% for the year, and the NASDAQ up 7% as well since the start of this year. Once again, both the S&P 500 and NASDAQ stand at record highs heading into the weekend. Bond yields actually slipped today. The yield on the 10-year note is at 4.18%. And the price of oil, by the way, did tick higher today of $1.54. It's $79.80. As tensions rise in the Middle East, new concerns about inflation as far as energy prices are concerned, a nervous time at the pumps again, with oil hovering just below $80 a barrel. And now the latest on your ride this afternoon here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. More disturbing videos out this week showing crimes. And you see this headline, West Hollywood gym owner pistol whipped while fending off Rolex robbery. How was that for a headline and the accompanying video? As we saw on ABC 7 this week, the owner of a West Hollywood gym is recovering after he was pistol whipped while fending off an attempt to rob his Rolex watch in broad daylight on Sunset Boulevard. right in front of his business. In the meantime, looks like some places are doing everything they can to deal with the crime wave we've seen out there, including one major mall here in Southern California, which is now doing things to minimize crime, forcing teenagers to leave the place if they don't have adult supervision. Teens facing new restrictions at a Torrance mall starting today. The Del Amo Fashion Center, new chaperone policy at the Del Amo Fashion Center in Torrance kicking in today, in place for anyone under 18 beginning this afternoon. In fact, the policy says that as of today, all minors must be accompanied by an adult age 21 or older after 3 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. Joining us now, the Honorable Dennis Zine, longtime Los Angeles City Council member, retired LAPD sergeant, and still a reserve officer in the LAPD, with, I believe, 56 years of service now to the City of Angels. Dennis Zine is on the line. Thank you very much, Dennis Zine, for speaking with us here this afternoon.
Frank, pleasure to be with you once again, on the line with you.
Yes, sir. That's wonderful, and we have the right person on today. Give us your reaction to these latest reports.
Frank, it's a continuation of what we hear, what we see, what the police experience. The mall situation, we've seen that in many parts of Southern California where the youngsters take over the mall, get in fights and cause chaos. And obviously one of the malls has taken action against that with the chaperones now. The watch situation, I've warned people many, many times, don't wear a Rolex watch in public. Don't wear expensive jewelry. And when you're driving down the street, watch and see who's following you. We know we have a new chief of police in Los Angeles. We know that crime is continuing. We know we don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough dispatchers handling the 911 calls. I mean, we really have some very serious problems, and people need to be aware of the consequences. I know many people are now getting CCWs. They want to carry a gun, which is now legal, but the fact of the matter is that's not going to protect everything you do, everywhere you go, but you need to be extremely cautious where you go, what you do, and watch behind you, because this crime trend is not going away. And people who have Camaro thefts have skyrocketed. For some reason, people like to steal Camaros, skyrocketing in numbers. So crime is continuing, and I caution people. We have an election coming up next week. If you don't vote, then don't complain. If you're a victim, then vote so you won't become a victim a second time, and make sure you vote to get rid of Gaston, the district attorney of LA County, who's responsible for many of the criminals that are preying on the people in Southern California, in Los Angeles County.
On the air live with the Honorable Dennis Zine, former LA City Council member, a longtime LAPD sergeant, as well as a current reserve LAPD officer. And since you're out there, and it sounds like you're out there right now, Dennis Zine, what about what's happening in downtown at the moment with that graffiti tower there, and what we've seen there, an entire complex taken over by vandals, basically, and now the city is picking up the tab for this. What about the situation there right in the heart of the city?
Frank, it's terrible. Look, I blame the city for letting this go on for 3 years. The company is bankrupt. They're talking about filing a lawsuit. Well, maybe they'll seize the property, and I don't know how much it's going to cost to tear the place down and rebuild it. I know Rick Caruso was talking about it, but the fact of the matter is, it's really negligence by the city of Los Angeles for not taking action on that when it began. I mean, it's gotten out of control. You wait 3 years until it becomes a total disaster before you do something about it. Kevin De Leon is taking action, but it's been 3 years since that's been vacant, and the graffiti and jumping off the tower and the deployment of police officers is phenomenal cost to the taxpayers, because now they deploy police officers to make sure that no one goes up there and trespasses, creates problems, and at the same time, who's going to pay the tab? This is going to come on the back of the taxpayers, and they're talking about filing a lawsuit. You file a lawsuit, a bankrupt company, or who are you going to get from? So we've got many, many problems, and I encourage people, get out and vote. Tuesday is a critical time. If you don't vote, don't complain. If you vote, at least vote your concern, and make sure you vote for the people who are going to make a difference and bring back some semblance of order. I heard a story today that up in Oregon, they want to bring back the drug laws. They've seen so much destruction, vandalism, confrontations, killings. They want to bring back the drug laws that they erased from the books. I mean, it's a merry-go-round, and the bottom line is innocent people are suffering the consequences.
And as we've seen there in downtown, you have the entire towers taken over by criminals. You have intersections being taken over by people doing donuts and all of that. We've seen that a lot. And then, of course, criminals taking over entire stores nowadays, running rampant. Dennis, what is it going to take to turn this terrible situation around here?
Well, we need to get the public involved. We need to have more police officers. We need to be public aware of what's going on. I mean, it's become a city of lawlessness. When you look at the smashing grabs that are taking place, the continuing smashing grabs, and it doesn't matter what part of the city, it's happening everywhere. So people need to be cognizant of it and support the police. They keep talking about police reform. Well, how about get reform of the criminal element that's preying on the law-abiding citizenry? Everybody wants to blame the police for being brutal and being this and being that. If the officer tells you to put your hands up and turn around and you comply, remember, you're on body cam, everything's going to be recorded, there's no consequence. But you see the pursuits, and I broadcast the pursuits for the media. We see that continuously. People want to get away, whether it's the core of that, get away. Respect for the law has really tarnished and evaporated for the most part here in Los Angeles and the county. And we need to change that. We can change it on Tuesday. I can't inform people enough to make sure they vote on Tuesday.
Absolutely. So the recall effort of the current DA was fueled largely by victims who were outraged about how the criminals were treated better than they were, right? Dennis Zine, what do you think is going to happen on Tuesday?
Well, Frank, I've got my fingers crossed, and I know you moderated a debate we had with all of the candidates except for Gaston, who failed to show. We saw all 11 of them out, all 11 in the community that we had up in Northridge, and it was a wonderful display of the candidates, and they've got some wonderful candidates in that. I haven't endorsed any of the candidates, but I'm telling you, they got some wonderful people who are running. And the worst person up there is going to be miles better than Gaston. And if we don't change that position, I will tell you it's gone. And it's interesting to note that the chief of police who just retired, where is he going? He's going to Tennessee. He's taking his family. He's moving to Tennessee. That gives you a reflection on what they look at Los Angeles as far as safe and an environment for you and your family.
Isn't that something? And that story that you mentioned early on with the Chevy Camaro theft soaring more than 1,000% in Los Angeles, I understand thanks to street takeovers. That is quite a story. So we have a lot to talk about here. And next week, of course, we'll be anchoring the election night coverage here along with Randy Wang and John Phillips. I'll be here for you. And Dennis Zine, thank you very much for coming to the line here. Dennis Zine on the line, former L.A. City Council member, longtime LAPD sergeant, and still a reserve officer with about 56 years of service to the City of Angels. Stay tuned now for Randy Wang and the 790 KBC News Blitz. And I'll be back at 4 o'clock on Monday for Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Afford Anything is a podcast that teaches you how to be smart with your money.
As a small business, you don't have the resources to pay the level of overhead and for the level of services that a Fortune 500 company could afford. So I certainly understand why, if you want to offer benefits, the providers of that fee is going to be higher because there's more account management per employee.
Make smarter choices and build a better life.
Afford Anything, wherever you listen.